right, welcome everybody. We are just going to give a few more minutes to allow some more people to join there. We'll probably kick it off at about 1:03 there. So it's 1:01 right now, another 2 minutes, and then we will kick it off. All right, well, let's kick it off there. Renee, if you want to just give me a thumbs up in the chat there and just let me know that you guys can hear me okay. I just want to make sure I've got no audio issues going on here. Okay. Good. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is the third and final webinar in our series on investigating threats with Microsoft Defender and Sentinel. Today's webinar is specifically focused on the Sentinel automation capabilities. Now, if you recall from last time, if you watched the previous webinar where we were reviewing Sentinel in terms of leveraging it for investigation, we ran a bit over time, or rather ran out of time, and there's some things that we didn't get a chance to cover off. So I will be spending about 10 to 15 minutes today just reviewing those. They actually do relate to some of the things we're going to be discussing around the orchestration and automation capabilities anyway, so it'll be a nice synergy. Now, I've just put in the chat there, if you can see it, the links to our previous webinars. The first one was investigating threats with Defender, and the second one, investigating threats with Sentinel. Those are on our YouTube channel. The links are there for you. If you haven't had a chance to watch them, they're there for you. Some of the information we'll be talking about today, as it relates back specifically to Sentinel, but also to Defender, is going to be pulled from those previous webinars, particularly as we go through the first part of the presentation deck I've got up, because a lot of it's going to be repeats. They're going to be going through it very quickly in the interest of time. So if you need a little bit of reference and you didn't get a chance to watch those previous webinars, or you just want a refresher, those two webinar links are available for you in the chat, and you can go ahead and watch them at your leisure. This there was a question in the chat earlier about whether or not this webinar will be recorded. It will be, and it will also be posted to our YouTube channel, usually in about a week from the webinar conclusion. So let us dive in. Now, for those of you who saw the previous webinars, I did review at a high level the anatomy of attack. So a way of simplifying investigating an attack while the things that you need to keep track of while you're going through that investigation process. So I'm going to do a very quick review here. So if you've seen those previous webinars, this is going to be, I'm going to go faster, but this is going to be a review. For those of you who, this is the first webinar you're watching, if you have questions on what I'm about to present, you can ask them at the end and we can touch base after, or again, you can go back and watch those previous webinars. So as a reminder, what we kind of focus on at the end of the day, when we're talking about threats to our organizations, it really is all about the data. And again, there's that highlighted finding from our security study is that specifically data exfiltration is really on the rise when we talk about cybersecurity incidents. And we're talking about attacks to data. It's really around that CIA triad that we all know so well for cybersecurity, right? Confidentiality, availability, and integrity. Confidentiality would be things like data theft. Availability is things like denial of service, often things like ransomware if the encryption piece is being leveraged there, or data integrity, right? So data tampering, misinformation, or in the case of IoT, sensor manipulation. So that's effectively what the attackers are going after. So to simplify the way we investigate attacks, there are really the five I like to refer to as the attack components. And again, there are much more complicated ways of looking at an attack. Lockheed Martin attack kill chain is a really good example of that, but we're simplifying here just to make the conversation a little bit easier. So there's really five components of the attack. Four are areas you have really good control over, and there are things that you want to attack. The last one, which is time, is just something really that you afford an attacker. And of course, the faster you're able to respond and contain a threat, the better, the easier it's going to be to recover if you need to recover at all. But I'm going to mainly focus on the four: the vector, the endpoint, privilege, and identity. So when we talk about a vector, that's a way in, out, or a way to move laterally, right? So it could be the internal network, it could be from a physical device like a USB, can be from the internet, it can even be what I like to refer to as sneaker net, right? Somebody physically accessing devices or people. The endpoints refer in this instance not just to technology endpoints like PCs and servers, but they can also be a person. It can be a serverless function. It really can be anything that executes the attack on your behalf, and often is multiple, which we'll see in a second. Identity, very important there. You need to keep track of identity when you're investigating. No attack can execute if you don't have an identity. And again, that can be a user, it can be an identity on a system or a service. And again, if it's more in that sneaker net kind of style, the identity can be somebody who's physically impersonating somebody. And then last but not least is privilege, right? So privilege means access to the data, the sensitive data or the sensitive systems. Even if you've got an identity that's relatively benign, you can't really do much if it doesn't have access to anything. If it does, that's where the damage happens. So as we go through the attack, investigating the attack, I should say, we want to keep track of these things. And in the Defender and Sentinel world, these are often referred to as entities, with the exception of privilege, because privilege is tied to an identity, and we'll see that. And if you go back to the previous webinars, we have a little stuff discussed that as well. So very quickly, I know I'm not going to run through this or take my time running through this example sandworm in terms of how you can track these things. So I'm going to go quick. Again, go back to those previous webinars if you want a little bit more detailed information. But if you take a look at how sandworm unfolded, I'm just going to go through these three steps. And if you focus your attention just on the upper left-hand corner, you can see I've got some of the attack components that are kind of highlighted here. You're going to see that this is going to change as the stage of the attack changes, right? We have different vectors, we have different endpoints, we have different identities, we have different privileges, thus different components. And as this attack continued to unfold, or continues, I should say, to unfold, you can see that again, going back and forth, that these attack components are expanding. So the nice thing about Defender and Sentinel, specifically since this is more on Sentinel, is a lot of these items are going to be tracked for you, depending on, of course, how you write your analytical rules in the form of entities. And we'll see that in just a second when we pivot into the investigation, right? But these are the important things that you need to watch. And again, generally speaking, if you can contain the endpoints, or you can contain privilege, or you can contain the identities, you can usually stop an attack in its tracks. Now, again, you need to contain all of the endpoints or all the identities, or at least the one kind of pivot point, and work your way back. But more importantly, it's going to give you a view into the things in your environment that changed, who changed them, and it's going to lead to help in terms of recovering from a cybersecurity incident if you've had a significant incident. Okay, so that was just a little bit about Sandworm, just to kind of paint those attack components, that picture that we've discussed the previous two times, so that we've got a reference point for going forward today. So I'm just going to quickly pivot now to Sentinel, because there were some things that we didn't discuss in the last webinar that we did want to get to, specifically in terms of the Sentinel capabilities when you're looking at doing an investigation. So I'm going to cover off really 4 components here before we kind of move into the automation pieces. The first one is going to be the incident activity. So that's your running incident journal, if you will, everything that's happened in terms of an investigation in an incident, whether it's been generated by the system by itself, whether it's your analyst comments in terms of what they have done to investigate the incident, whether it's a playbook or something like that that has executed some automated steps and has highlighted that stuff in the incident activity. So it's a really important thing. We're also going to take a look at the logs. And when I say the logs, it's an area within Sentinel that allows you to pivot within the investigations to start expanding your investigation. I'm going to walk through a little bit of an example of how to do that and how you might want to do that. And then we're going to review bookmarks, which is a way of identifying, I'm going to call it additional evidence for lack of a better term, that's actually driven from those logs, right? So from that kind of hunting activity, okay? And then we'll review a new feature, which is, and very, very quickly referred to as similar instances, or sorry, similar incidents. It's a new feature. It's a preview feature right now within Sentinel, but it does allow you to do some of the triage steps kind of without taking any action or writing your own playbook that you would normally want to do as part of an investigation anyways. Again, it is still in preview, and we will talk about some of the things you should probably do as you're investigating and going from manual to automated within the context of those instances as well. And then finally, we'll talk very, very quickly about another preview feature, which is called tasks, but we'll pivot there and we'll start talking about some of the manual investigation activities that you can do to start and then pivoting to automation. So let me just quickly pivot into our little Sentinel instance here. Make sure I can find it. Oh, it's just apologies, just hang on one second there. There we go. Okay, hopefully you guys can all see my screen. I'm just actually going to go to the main screen here. So let me just go back one. Okay, so we were here last time, as you recall, this is what I said during the last webinar, that this is probably where you're going to spend, at least as an analyst, most of your day, most of your time is going to be in dealing with incidents. You may pivot into doing some hunting if you're not automating that. You may review your entity behavior. You may dive into, threat intelligence and start to review new threat intel that's come in, or threat indicators anyways, and register them. But primarily, you're going to spend your time as an analyst within kind of this view and looking at incidents. So if you recall back to last time, and I'm just going to quickly pivot here to one of the incidents that we have up. I've got just to be a little bit faster than last time because we had some loading issues last time. I've already got this stuff already set up so that we can pivot quickly to it. So if you take a look at what we're talking about here, or sorry, what we're looking at here, we're looking at all the details around the incident. We spoke last time about the incident timeline and the entities. And again, those entities are mapping back to those attack components, whether or not they are the vectors or the users or the privilege, whatever the case may be, that's where they are. They're all listed here within the entities. And I talked last time how about you can click into them and you can get more information and whatnot. So all that kind of stuff is there for you. It makes it really easy to start your investigation, particularly if you've got your attack techniques, tactics and techniques mapped in your analytic rules, or if they're the out-of-box analytic rules that are creating those already for you. So it's giving you an idea of sort of what techniques and tactics were used right here on the screen without having to pivot or move around, which is really, really handy. We also talked a little bit about the insights, which is not going to be generated for every incident, but certainly will. And as you click on each one of these entities or in the timeline, you're going to see some of those insights update. So that's kind of where we left things off. We also looked at the investigation attack graph there, where we could see the similar timeline information. But what we didn't get a chance to cover off was, again, as I spoke earlier, the activity log, the logs, which allow you to, or log window, which allows you to pivot and kind of do some hunting, the ability to create bookmarks, and you'll see we have no bookmarks here currently in this particular instance. And then this new feature we talked about that's in preview, which is the similar instance, and then incident tasks, which again is also in preview. So we're going to talk about that a little bit now. And once we're done, then we're going to pivot kind of to the let's talk about manual versus automated investigation. So let's very quickly take a look at the activity log here. So by clicking this button on the left-hand side here, what you're going to see is a full running journal of the incident activity. Now, in this particular instant, not a lot has happened, right? An automatic automation rule was run to, it actually in this instance will run a playbook that just notifies via either email or Teams or whatnot, analysts that there is a new incident, and it's giving you kind of a running history. But we can add comments to this. So as you're investigating your incident as an analyst, this is really where that journaling needs to take place. Now, I will talk about how we can integrate that kind of back and forth with maybe like a ticketing system when we get to the automation piece. But as it sits for now, this is really where you want to, as you're going and unfolding your investigation and making decisions about that incident, this is typically where you're going to start to record that information. And just by way of example, I am. Okay, just very quick. I know it's a not really a legitimate comment that you would have, but you're going to see that that's actually journaled here. So anybody who's investigating it, even if they're not assigned, maybe they're part of a team, maybe they're a junior analyst and somebody else has this incident assigned to them already, it's going to give that kind of full journaling of what is going on and what is happening. Now, if I pivot to this incident over here, it's just a slightly different incident, but it's a little bit more of a complex incident. You're going to see there's actually a bigger journal here, right? So what is happening? The Sentinel is going through and it's building and associating all of these alerts. Actually, a lot of the alerts are being associated from Microsoft Defender, as you can see, but it's adding them to this instant, and you're seeing that running kind of status of what is unfolded with this incident. And again, if anybody added something, it's going to be recorded here with the user who's attached to it. So you're able to actually see it and record that kind of full history of what's going on with your incident. Now, this is going to become even more important when we actually pivot over to doing things like automation, which can be quite handy, because the automation tasks, not only are you going to get an indication that they're running, but you can actually update the history of the incident for everything that the automation tasks are going to be doing on your behalf. And you're going to see that in action in a few minutes, but it's some pretty cool stuff. So that really covers off the incident activity. Now you can come in and you can delete these comments if you're the editor for them and whatnot, and you can control over time, or sorry, through automation, what goes in and what doesn't go in when you run an automated playbook. So if you don't want to populate your incident activity log with, well, let's just call it benign information that's really meaningless, you can control that via those playbooks if you choose to, or you can choose to log everything. It is completely up to you. Okay. So that covers off the activity logs. Next, I want to talk about the logs themselves. Really, this is kind of like in-incident hunting. So if you recall back to both the Defender and the Sentinel webinars, for those of you who watched it, one of the things that was happening as part of the attack that we had launched and unfolded was we were exfiltrating some data outbound via FTP. And FTP was flagged as one of those protocols that we maybe want to watch out for, right? And maybe wanted to kind of extend our search. So I'm just going to very quickly in the entity here, just to give you, let's see if this one has it. So in this instance, you can see just by looking at the entities, I actually have in this instance a URL entity. It's called FTP ://18.117, what the case may be. So right there, we know we need to pivot, right? One of the things that we know from this incident, if you recall back to last time, is most of this incident information is coming from the Defender platform and it's being integrated out, right? But we maybe want to see where within our network, we've had maybe other connections from other systems within our environment. And the way in which we're going to need to do that is to do some hunting. Now, what we've set up here is, to be frank, very basic, but it's really just to illustrate kind of how you can go about this process. So within this environment, and we're going to have to go all the way back to the first webinar where we described that the environment that we have set up here is actually all fronted. It's like a cloned production corporate environment, and it's fronted with a Palo Alto network, or Palo Alto Networks firewall. So we've got a firewall there that is going to have some logging, and we've integrated that logging into Sentinel here. So one of the things that we're going to do, we're going to try to pivot on that now, and we're going to run maybe a query to just see, do we have any other connections from within that environment that we should associate as evidence, if you would, with this particular incident. So I'm just going to bring up the logs window for just a second. And before we dive in and run any of the queries that I want to run, or the one specific query, I'm just going to give a quick overview here, because there's some really cool things that you can leverage right here, especially if you're not very familiar with writing KQL queries or how you might want to pivot. If you want, you can, from this screen right here, you can take a look at the different tables that you can access within Sentinel to run your investigation against. So if you're going to, again, you're expanding, you're enriching your investigation here, okay? You can also take a look at a whole host of queries. So these are queries that, these ones are mine here, but these are queries that are all available to you if you wanted to try to pivot your investigation, but go beyond maybe your comfortability. So for example, if we go into like the security area here, you can see there's a whole host of different types of queries that we can run. If you wanted to run one, you just need to hover over it and you can load it into the other. I'm just going to do that now just for fun. Now, obviously, you're going to need to change this particular IP address, and this one is coming from the common security log, but it allows you to very quickly pivot and run queries, even if you're not super skilled within the KQL to run these queries. Okay, so you've got that, which is great. You also have access to functions that you can run, whether they're Sentinel functions or workspace functions, and you can apply a filter here as well, although you can just use the filter button till your heart's content. Now, one thing to note is a lot of these queries are actually being pulled from the community. So these queries will continue to evolve and expand over time, making it a little bit easier for you to kind of pivot and learn how to do an investigation, how to do that threat hunting, again, without a lot of that KQL knowledge, or even without a lot of experience. And you can create your own as well. I mean, there's tons of resources. The community is quite large for Sentinel, so there's tons of resources out there, constant development that is going on within the Sentinel community. And these queries will be developed over time. Some will be registered here. Some you're going to create on your own. I won't go through to that today in terms of how you kind of create and save your own, but it is certainly something that you can do. Okay, so let's go back to what we're intending here. One of the things I said that we wanted to do is we wanted to take a look to see if we could find and pivot and find any other FTP connections to that particular IP address. So actually, let me just go back here quickly and pull that IP address out. Sorry, click OK. I'm just going to go wait for the entities to load again because I want to pull that address in. All right, so 18. Sorry, you'll have to forgive that there. I'm just going to copy this information here just for fun. All right, so let's go back to the logs there. And I'm just going to load up. I've already got some queries ready to go here. Actually, let me just add that filter in. Queries. There we go. I've got it in my favorites already. So we're going to pull up. We're just going to load this get suspicious FTP connections. Admittedly, it is a rudimentary query. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for this IP address. I'm going to search for, say, in the last 7 days. Oh, that's risky users. I'm sorry. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. Let's just change that IP address. That actually might be the correct IP address. Oh, it's already there. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to run this. And what we're doing in this particular query is we're actually running against the common security log. Specifically, as I mentioned, the firewall is a Palo Alto Networks firewall. So just to make the query run faster, we're stripping it down just to specifically look for the details from that particular log source. We're just going to go ahead and run this. Okay, we're going to let it take its time. And it looks like we do actually have 2 connections coming from 2 different sources. Now, I just happen to know that one of these sources is different from the particular device or endpoint that was involved in this incident that we're looking at here today, because there is only one. We can see there's 2 different source IP addresses here, right? So from here, you can actually get the details, right? You can see exactly what has gone on in terms of if you've got like and this is again pulling from Palo Alto, but we're definitely seeing some unencrypted FTP traffic. It's going to that same destination IP address. Now, one thing I will note is we've suppressed the Palo Alto threat, which would have actually blocked that. This normally the threat signature, which is why this got through, in case anybody's wondering. Now, from here, what you can do once you've reviewed it, and you may get some results that have nothing to do with this particular incident, you just want to discard them. But if you want to start marking this additional log information into the incident as and again, you can't see the air quotes here, but evidence, right? In terms of how to expand your investigation, you can add them as bookmarks. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now and add these bookmarks. And what you'll see once I finish populating this is you're going to see these bookmarks kind of pop up over here. Okay. Now, when you're doing your bookmarks, and we haven't really reviewed the analytic rules in detail in terms of the entity mapping, but as I spoke about last time, as you are running through your investigation, you want to make note of those attack components. And those are within the Sentinel world really referred to as the entities. So you can do an entity mapping here if you choose to kind of highlight some of the additional findings from those particular hunting exercises that you did. So in this instance, we're going to see mark the identity, the custom identity, and we're, oops, sorry. Just going to see if I can move this over, and we're going to choose, we'll go with source IP, because that's what we're really concerned with, is what other entities in our environment have had this as an issue, right, where they're connecting to this FTP server. So we're just going to go ahead and click create there. Oh, I'm having an issue there. I apologize. Not quite sure why. Let's try that again. I'm gonna ignore the entities for now, just to see if I can get through. There we go. Yeah, I did the entity mapping wrong. I do apologize for that. Okay, so we're going to close this down, or click OK. And what you're going to notice once I've done that is this whole thing is going to refresh, right? Your whole page is going to refresh. And now we see that we actually have 2 additional bookmarks there. This said 0 before. So this is your additional evidence, if you would. And again, you can pivot, you can rerun this query. I just selected the one, obviously. And it's going to give you all of the details specifically for that particular hunt, not just what was found, but also what query was run. This is where the results are. So now you've got all this data. And actually, we did do the entity mapping, which is good. So you can see where the entity actually did map against this particular internal IP address for the one that I'd flagged. So we've effectively marked additional evidence within our investigation. So if we are maybe doing passing this off to another analyst, or we just want to add more evidence for our response actions that we're going to take sometime further down the line, we're able to do that right then and there. And again, this is all just through integrated into your logs window. So being able to pivot and run any query, and then if you find that there's value there to them, you're going to go ahead and you're going to add them as bookmarks. And again, adding that evidence. Okay. All right. That covers off both bookmarks and logs. Now I'm just going to quickly go back into the overview here and just kind of review this feature down here called similar instance. Now this is going to come back when we start doing some triage, okay? And we'll walk through that. But basically what you're getting out of box now with Sentinel, and it is still in preview, so that same warning around any preview feature applies. If you're going to use it in production, use it cautiously and with a grain of salt, because it may change and it may have errors and issues. But it is very handy because usually as part of investigating an incident, one of the things that you often need to do is start to look for similar incidents, right? Do you have other incidents that are related to this incident? Maybe they're related by because the user or the endpoint is the same, or maybe they use the similar tactics and techniques, or maybe the FTP address, for example, maybe that's been a connection that's been leveraged in the past, and you're going back, in time, maybe 90 days or a year, or whatever the case may be. So usually that's an activity you have to do as part of your investigation, and Sentinel is basically doing that for you out of box, which is really handy. Now there are some caveats to this similar incidents. Which are currently in preview. Number one, it's only going to give you the top 20. Okay, now that may be good enough. It may not be good enough. You'll have to make that decision on your own. So that's kind of like the first caveat. And then, of course, there's that second caveat around this is still in public preview. So can it be used 100% reliably right now? Probably not, but it's still good information to have, especially because this is something that you're going to have to do on your own, right, when you're investigating, or you should be doing on your own anytime you're investigating an instance. So it's really handy to do. So I just wanted to give it a little bit of airtime there. The last thing I want to talk about, but I'm not going to dive into just yet because it's going to come back when we start talking about the orchestration automation process, is tasks. So tasks are items that you can register within an instance to sort of guide the investigation. You can do them manually, which is just by going ahead and clicking an add task. I'm not going to do that. Or you can actually use a playbook to create tasks for you. And these are, you can think of these like like a task list, where that you just kind of check off a checklist, right? Do this, do this, do this, and the analyst is going to go through and they're going to check them off as it happens. Oh, sorry, as they happen or as they complete them. So it's similar to the activity log in that the activity log is used for like journaling and whatnot. This is really to ensure that you're kind of driving a standardized investigation, or that's how you can use it and how I recommend using it myself. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in the context of how we go from a fully manual investigation to a largely automated investigation process. Okay, so I am now going to pivot just very quickly back to the little presentation deck that I've got up there. Give me just 1 second there, folks. Okay, so let's talk a little about Sentinel orchestration automation. And before we dive in to get there, let's talk a little bit about how you as an organization should take your journey towards automation. Okay, because there are a couple of best practices that you really do need to be aware of, and I think it's important. We have a lot of customers that ask us about automation, and that's where they start. They're like, I want to automate everything. I want to lessen the amount of time that my analysts are spending doing X, Y, or Z. And it's a great goal to have, and absolutely something you should strive for. But it's certainly not where you want to start. Simply put, if you automate a bad process, an investigation is a process. If you automate bad processes, it's not going to make things better. It's going to make things worse, and can lead to some very dangerous consequences for you and your organization. So it's not something that you should approach kind of willy-nilly. You really do need to plan out how you're going to go through to get from manual where you are today to where you want to be automated. Okay, and I would say as a general rule of thumb, don't think that you can and don't strive to automate everything. You're never going to get there, or at least you shouldn't. There should always be some form of human analyst looking at instance, maybe not the low value instance, or at least response actions that you're going to take, and at least until you're 100% sure that they are near flawless. Now, admittedly, AI may change that in the future, but we're not there yet. So how, as an organization, should you go about diving into the automated process? So trying to get to that automation panacea. First, I'm going to focus on the one keyword in the center there, which is orchestrate. It's another way of basically, it's another word for coordination, right? How you coordinate your investigation process. And that's really where you're going to start. And that really should be more of a manual process. But let me back up just a second. Let's talk about the process. The very first thing you need to do is you need to analyze your current investigation processes. Okay, you need to look at how you are doing your investigations today and find commonalities. If you're 100% manual today, and let's say you've got a team of 5 analysts, if an incident comes in, and let's just say it's a ransomware incident, guaranteed that your analysts, each of them, are going to investigate that a slightly different way, and in some cases in very different ways, right? And we want to avoid that, because you can't automate something that is not common, right? Those are more like bespoke, if you would, types of investigations, and you don't want to do that. So you want to take a look at your investigations and how your analysts, your team are investigating incidents, and find commonalities and identify what their pain points are, right? If that's where the automation piece is really going to come in. It's something that is just it's time consuming, or it's repetitive, it's prone to human error. Those are really good candidates for automation. But you want to know what your pain points are going in, and then you're going to want to model your investigation. You can use any modeling tool you want. Visio is handling it is very handy there, but you want to build out that process flow, and you want to ensure that your investigators are following that process flow as they're doing the investigation before you do anything within Sentinel, whether it is even building out a benign playbook that is mostly orchestrated or automated. Get those processes mapped and then run them through a bunch of times when you're investigating incidents to make sure that everything that you've accounted for, let's say 80%, we'll use the 80-20 rule, 80% of those common activities. Okay, so start to map that out. And that's not a technological process, right? That is just an analytical process that you're going to go through. But then you can pivot. You can say, okay, now I'm going to start to orchestrate that. So what that means in Sentinel is I am going to build out playbooks, but these playbooks don't have automation. It is simply, the playbook is simply there to drive out standardization of investigations. And this is where now I'm going to call back to those tasks. This is where those tasks can really come in handy. Okay, you can build out playbooks that are going to generate those tasks, and that's that checklist that ensures that your analysts are investigating a particular type of incident the same way every single time. Okay, and as you're going through that process with live incidents, you can now start to look out for some of what I've referred to as deviations or one-off use cases in that little list that you see on the screen there. You know, as you go through, there's going to be things that you just can't orchestrate. They're just not common. And maybe it's a pivot to do a different type of investigation or gather more information because that particular incident, even though it's been classified as, if we go back to the previous example, as a ransomware incident, maybe it was a different type of ransomware incident that you didn't account for before. So as you go through the orchestration process, and again, over time, building out your tasks and ensuring that your analysts are investigating the same way, you're going to start to get a real good understanding of, okay, what components can I automate? What things are we always doing that we should always do and we should always do the same way? And again, that are potentially prone to human error versus what are some of the things that we can't really automate because they're not common. We don't do them every time, or it's going to our kind of like a choose your own adventure, our decision paradigm and deciding where we're going to pivot changes based on maybe some input, and we're not able to actually put that into some sort of common process, right? So that's where that orchestration piece really comes in kind of handy. And then once you're there, now you can pivot to automation, right? So you can start looking at those, again, those common tasks, okay? And I'm a big fan of, and so this is my personal guidance, don't focus on automating response actions. Focus on automating investigative actions first, right? If you take response actions like and the example you'll see kind of a little bit later is, hey, let's isolate an endpoint. That may sound like a really good idea, but if your process is broken or you isolate the wrong thing, you could wind up being on the street looking for a new job because you locked a VP out of their laptop at a critical moment, or you took down the e-commerce system because you decided to isolate it. I'm just using that as an example in terms of a response action you can take. So before you start going down your journey around automation on response actions, start with those kind of repetitive tasks that always happen, that are more investigative, whether that is running a hunt or doing some triage work, or just even notifications, right? Automate what makes sense. And I would say start with simple processes. And when I say simple process, I mean simple investigations. Like if you've got a very complex investigation that you have mapped out, not a good candidate to start your automation journey. Once you get good at it, absolutely, you know, fill your boots. That's the power of the automation, is to make those complicated investigations more streamlined, but don't start there. Okay, and then I would recommend, at least as you're starting on your journey, manually trigger the playbooks, for instance, when you're in there. So you can set up automation rules so that playbooks are launched automatically based on types of incidents, and definitely want to get there at some point, but don't start there. That's, you know, you definitely want to focus on manual first. That way, you know which series, and often you're going to run 2 or 3 playbooks, which playbooks and in which order you're going to want to run for a particular type of incident. Okay. So I hope that was clear. Let's just quickly go over a very simple triage process as an example. So we're going to walk through this a little bit here and kind of see what this is going to look like from a manual, and then we'll kind of talk about leveraging tasks to drive it, and then we'll look at an automated capability to do this. Okay, so this is an instant triage workflow. It's actually based off of an out-of-box triage work or playbook, or series of playbooks really, that Microsoft has developed, so you can go ahead and deploy it in your Sentinel environment. It's actually really handy. But effectively, when an incident comes in, as part of the triage process, we want to take take the following steps that you see on the screen, right? We want to get the risk information for each user, right? And that would be from the Azure AD identity protection, right? And we want to pull that in and we want to register that in the activity history. And then we want to search for, if we have a threat intel feed, we want to search for any of the IOCs that have been flagged or any of the identities that may exist as an IOC within the threat intel feed. And then we want to add that to the history. And then we want to do that search for a similar or related instance. Now that's gotten a little bit easier because of that similar instance pane that we talked about just a few minutes ago. But generally that's what we want to do. We want to find all the related or similar instance and add those to the history. And based off of all that, we want to calculate a risk score. Okay, and based off that risk score, we either want to raise or lower the severity of an instance. And in this particular instance, if it's really low, we want to go ahead and close it because it's most likely a false positive. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do that. I'm just kind of walking through what that flow looks like. So if we're going to, and I'll just very quickly pivot back to the Sentinel instance here. So you guys should be able to see that here. Okay, so if we were going to walk through that exact same process, right, the first thing we would want to do, as I kind of mentioned, is we want to take a look at some of that user info. So I do have a couple of, just to make this process faster, you'd have to obviously develop those, but I do have a couple of queries kind of ready to go here where we can do precisely that, right? So when we have the first thing we want to do is get the risky user info for particularly the user. Oh, I didn't copy the user here. Hang on one second. I'll just quickly do that. Take a look at accounts. Okay, so this is me here, which is fantastic. By the way, I could just pivot within the investigation graph you saw before and run these queries. It's just because I've got these queries kind of up and ready to go to kind of streamline our discussion here. Okay, so I'm just going to do the risky user info, and I'm just going to go ahead and click run this query, and now I've got this information, right? So now I'm collecting this information. Oh, for some reason I've got something wrong with the query. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's why. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so we've got no risky information, so that's good. There's nothing we need to add. I also want to check user risk events, right? Because there's two tables within Sentinel that's going to collect this information because it comes from the identity protection. So we're going to go ahead and do that and load that into the editor. I've already actually got the username there, which makes things a little bit easier for me. And actually, I'm just going to expand the timeline here and see, do we have any risk events for this particular user? No, we don't in this particular case. Okay, so we've found nothing. Don't need to actually register anything as a bookmark. Let's take a look at our threat data and see if there's anything in there. All right, so now again, I'm running another query. I'm loaded into the editor here. I'm actually just going to look for this particular indicator, only because I happen to know it's in our indicator feed and happen to know it was involved in a number of different incidents. So I'm just going to kind of let it run here. And we see we've actually got a bunch of those connections. And this is all coming from the threat intel feed. So I'm again going to mark these and added a bookmark there. I'm just going to go ahead and click create just to streamline that kind of process. We'll do maybe one more there, add that bookmark. Okay, good. So now we've effectively done the first kind of 3 parts of that process. We've done that triage. And again, that triage is often going to take you a lot longer, particularly if you don't have the queries already set up. You're going to have to pivot into identity protection and look for all the users. You're going to have to do it for all of the users that are involved in this particular instance, or all of the IP addresses or URLs, any of the entities. Like you should be doing this for all these entities that you kind of see here as it goes through. And you can see that's going to be a very long kind of process just to triage the incident. And again, as we talked about, and I'm just going to go ahead and close this. If we go back to the overview here, the similar instance work that we want to do is kind of nicely already done for us, which is very, very handy, right? So it's going to come up here, and we've already got that information. Okay. So what we've kind of walked through very quickly is how you might want to triage an incident. But again, we want to try to drive standardization. And one of the ways that we can do that is with the tasks, right? The tasks are going to give us the ability to drive that standardization because they're going to be checklists that ensure whoever is reviewing the incident, like a SOC manager, for example, is ensuring that, yes, our analysts are going through their checklist and they are doing the things that they need to, and that can be cross-correlated against the activity log to see where that information comes in. Now, one of the ways in which you can do this, and it's actually very, very handy, in my opinion, is actually just to run a playbook that is going to create those common tasks. So I'm just going to quickly here click run playbook. And I have a playbook built. And again, it's a very simple playbook. It's really just designed to generate these tasks kind of exactly how you saw them. You can see it's create manual triage tasks. I'm just going to go ahead and click run. And I am going to let that run in the background. It will take probably about a minute or so, maybe less. And by the way, if you wanted to watch the run of a playbook, so if you've launched a playbook and you want to see kind of how it's running, you can actually even or just go into the automation itself. I'm just going to pull that one up as an example. Take a look at its over. You can see it's actually already succeeded here, but I can actually watch the run as it's happening if I want to, and it's going to. Then this again is a very simple playbook, but you can actually watch it run over time. You can see if maybe it's gotten stuck. It's really good for actually playbook development. So sorry, that's just a little pivot there. Okay, so if we come back here now, and I'm just going to close this, and I am going to take a look at our tasks, and you're going to be able to see that now I've got all of those tasks up and how they were, who they created them. Again, you can see they were created by a playbook, and this can now I can use to drive that standardization, right? So we know the processes that we already went through, right? Yes, I went ahead and I completed this particular task, which is getting the risk information for each user. There was no risk information in this case, so I'm just going to go ahead and click this task is complete because there's nothing to add to the history, and I can continue going down this this instant here and continuing to do this, okay, if I wanted to. And again, just to go back to the activity log, if we go back to the activity log, the fact that the playbook ran is going to show up in our activity it's not populating here for some reason. It will show up eventually that the playbook was actually run, which gives us kind of that kind of full history there again of what's happening. Now the tasks themselves, they're still in preview, so as I check them off, they're not going to go into the activity log. And again, it is still in preview, so anybody can come in here and just go ahead and delete them if they've got the ability to actually edit an instant there. So it's not a perfect solution yet. I bet it will get there soon once it comes out of preview. But again, it's a way of driving your standardization. Okay, so that's what that process would look like from manual, but now task driven. So we've gone from the initial, hey, everybody kind of investigates this, things the same way, to, okay, we've got a process and we're going to follow that process, to now we've got tasks that are going to ensure that we're following that process the right way. But what if we wanted to automate everything within that particular process, right? If that full list that we saw where we're getting the user information, we're getting the thread information, we're getting the similar instance, and we're calculating the score. What if we could automate all of that, right? And how much time would that save? And again, we're going very quickly here because we only have an hour, but if you can kind of just think a little bit outside of the box here and how long it would take an investigator, an analyst, if you would, to do that kind of investigation, record all that information in the journal, that's going to take some time. And if you can streamline those common kind of tasks, why not go ahead and do that? So the example I'm going to give here is, and again, I'm going to run another playbook against this instance. I'm going to run the triage workbook to highlight, if you just search Google for sample, STAT triage, that's a playbook that you can load. It's an ARM template you can load into your instance of Sentinel. It is developed by Microsoft, and it is a great little triage work playbook to have at your disposal. It's actually very, very effective. We don't have time to go through all the details of that today, but what I am going to do is I'm going to kick it off. Okay, now this one does take some time to go through. So as I've said, if you wanted to monitor how a particular playbook is running for a particular run, you can just come in, take a look at the history. You can see that we've got one running here, and you can actually just kind of watch where it is over time, right? So right now, and you just have to click the refresh if you want to kind of see it, or do the auto refresh. And what you're going to see is it's going to run through, again, we've got the risk module, related alerts module, or related instance, and threat intel module. What that is going to do is generate all that stuff that we talked about before, and it's going to automatically calculate a score, something that we did not do manually previously. So it's going to run this, it's going to take a little bit of time for this incident to run. Okay, and in the interest of time, we only have 11 minutes. So I am going to pivot a little bit while we're waiting for this one to complete. I'll come back to this incident in a second, but I want to show you another really kind of cool thing that you can do in terms of automation. Again, this is going to give you kind of a window into how can I leverage Sentinel to automate some of both the investigation, but also some of those response actions. So I'm just going to very quickly pivot out and I will come back into this once this finishes running. But let me just quickly go back to my presentation here, so I can set the stage for the last workbook that we're going to, or sorry, last playbook that we're going to look at. Okay, so this is an example of something that we built, and again, purpose is just for demo, so it is not flawless by any stretch of the imagination. But a workbook that or a playbook that you're about to see that we're going to run, and in this playbook, what we're going to do is we've got a development instance of ServiceNow. And when an instance is created, we are going to create that kind of initial ServiceNow ticket just for our journaling, because a lot of organizations, they actually use ServiceNow for their journaling. And we're going to post a message to teams. We're then going to get all of the instant details so we can flow that into ServiceNow again for the purposes of journaling within our ticketing system in that instance ServiceNow. And then we're going to post back to teams asking the analyst to make a decision on whether or not we want to isolate any of the incidents. Now, in this particular instance, I'm not going to click isolate because that's actually going to shut down some of the things that I've got running, and I don't want to do that. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to update that ServiceNow instant with that decision on whether or not the actual endpoints themselves will be isolated. And if, by the way, you'll see it in the playbook if we have a chance to review kind of the process. But if I did click yes, we would call out to Defender and isolate those instances, those endpoints. So that's what we're going to look at when it comes to that playbook. So now I'm just setting the stage for that one there, and I'm going to pivot back now to Sentinel. I just want to see if this one is completed before we continue here. It's still doing the risk scoring, so no problem there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pivot over to another instant that we've got going on here, and I am going to run. We've just referred to it as a ransomware playbook. It's not really a ransomware playbook. And I'm just going to go ahead and click run. Okay, so I'm just going to run. And I'm actually going to go in and take a look at that playbook just to watch the run there for you. And also so you can see what's happening. Now, it's not an overly complicated playbook, but it is quite long and it does take some time. But one of the things I want to kind of point out here, and I've got my teams and my ServiceNow instant up there. You just saw it pop up. We have this new instant. It's got some of the information, and we're providing a link to the instant within this particular post. If I pivot over into my ServiceNow instant, what you're going to see is that instant has actually been created in ServiceNow as well. So this is a new instant that's just been generated. And if I come in here right now, I'm going to see that there's some of the work notes there. That the instant has been created, but also it's got some details in there, right? So what we're doing is we're populating all the impacted assets, and I think that's people and devices, copying all the IOCs, anything that's malicious. We're basically providing that detail within the incident itself. What I'm also seeing now, oh, I accidentally clicked it. That was a mistake. Sorry, I'm going to rerun that instant. Rerun that. Let me just go ahead and delete this instant. I apologize for that. I'm a little click happy today. So let's run that again. We're just going to resubmit it. Actually, I'm going to do it on this incident instead. There we go. Let's kick that one off. We'll come back in here and we'll just take a look at the overview, see what the runs look like. Refresh that there. There we go. And now it's running. Let's see if that comes up the way I wanted it. Now, again, we see that there's that new instant there. We're just going to wait for a couple of seconds for the instant to pop up. And what you're going to see, assuming the playbook works as intended, you're going to see it actually asking us, hey, do you want to go ahead and run this or create this workbook, or isolate, I should say, these endpoints. I'm just going to see here if it's actually coming up in our Sentinel or our ServiceNow instance. Just try to be mindful of the time here. Okay, we do see it in there. There we go. So as the playbook ran, now it's asking the analyst here, okay, so we found that there's a couple of servers here, and it's not the greatest formatting, again, quickly put together, but it's asking us, what do we want to do? Do we want to isolate? Do we not want to isolate? Now I'm going to click the do not isolate, because again, I don't want to isolate those particular endpoints, because it'll shut some things down on me. So once I've done this, and this is an adaptive card, I'm getting a response back telling me, well, thank you very much, and no hosts are actually going to be isolated. And if we come back into the ServiceNow ticket there, what we're going to see is a message in there basically indicating, where was it here? Here we go. Analysts have confirmed that the following hosts will, well, that's a typo message, but that no host will actually be isolated. So again, very simple playbook that you can use to sort of drive communication and integration between systems. Again, very rudimentary kind of example of how you can do that, but can be quite handy, particularly for sending stuff back and forth to a system like ServiceNow, or for just general communication into Teams. It can be very, very handy to leverage. Okay, we're going to pop back to our incidents there. I just want to take a look at the one, I believe it was 1521 was the one that we actually did the triage on. So let's take a look. Let's see if I'm right on that, and take a look at the activity log. No, it wasn't 1521. It must have been 1520. There we go. 1520. Full details. Go back into the activity log there. I'll wait for it to load because there's a lot that's probably going to load in here as it did its triage. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of scroll through all the stuff. And again, remember back when we were doing this manually or even task driven, it was all potentially time consuming, especially when you have to do it for absolutely every single entity that you find. So in this particular instance, it is actually grabbing this information kind of automatically, right? So we are automatically doing some triage here. You can see here that it's getting its privilege information for the accounts that are involved. In this case, we have one person who is privileged, one who's not. You can see whether or not they're MFA registered, whether or not they've got their SSPR enabled, and if they're registered. Right, so you're getting information on the account themselves in terms of again, whether they're privileged, whether they require MFA. You're seeing where the IP address connection info is coming from. In this case, it's coming from AWS. You're getting any MFA failed count. In this case, we're not getting any, so no big deal. But you are seeing that the number of entities analyzed is 2 for that user risk info. So that's that manual thing that we would have had to do before, right? Take a look at the risk events, take a look at the the sign-in risk events and the user risk events. You're also then getting some details on the threat intel. So here we can see we've got a couple of matches in the threat intel from, in this instance, our anomaly feed and one Sentinel. This is one that we just kind of added in. So you're seeing some threat intel matches so things that have been seen that are in the threat intel tables within this incident. Okay, I'm just going to keep scrolling up here. You're now looking at all of the related alerts. So again, similar to what was happening down here with a similar instance, but now we're grabbing all of them, and it's all being populated, again, being journaled within the incident itself. Okay, and it's actually giving you on this next step here. You can't see it. I'm going to scroll up the way to the top, but this is where it's actually calculating its risk score. So one of the things it's doing is it's now putting together all this risk information, all this triage information to calculate a score. Okay, and so this is just telling you which items added to that score, many related alerts, as you can see here, which added to that score. And if we scroll up to the threat intel, I think I saw a score of 150. Yes, I did. A score of 150. No additional risks. We didn't find any risks. We saw that before for the users that we were concerned with. So overall, our risk score has been calculated. And if we just keep scrolling up here, what you're going to see is the calculated risk score is now sitting at 757. So that's a high risk score. And as a result, this particular incident has been given a severity of high. Now, it already was high, but it hasn't been automatically closed. So it took about 2 minutes for that playbook to run, but to do that exact same kind of work in a manual fashion, you could see that it would take actually a significant amount of time. And if we go back, now I'm going all the way back to the beginning of our presentation there, the one attack component that really you afford attackers, that's that time component. And if you can shrink that time down, so much the better, right? It's going to reduce the impact on your overall environment and speed up the recovery. And the one thing that automation is going to get you, if you follow those best practices and you don't automate bad processes, is it's going to help you, at the very least, streamline your investigations so you can start to recover sooner. All right, that pretty much covers off what we wanted to cover today. There's 2 minutes remaining. I'm just going to see if there's any questions in the chat that I can answer quickly. Let me just see here. Multiple admins in my tenant. So there is one question. I have multiple admins in my tenant. Will they all have access to the playbooks that are created? It's a bit of a long question. So it really depends on the roles that you have assigned to them. There are roles to run playbooks and be able, and then there's roles to develop playbooks. So it depends on what role you want your IT admins to have. The way in which you do that is within the workspace itself. And I've got 1 minute here, so I'm going to see if I can show you this very, very quickly here. Within Sentinel, if you come into the settings and you go to workspace settings, okay, there's an identity and access management feature here. Okay, and through this, you can actually assign the roles. Okay, so if you want your analysts to be able to create roles, you need to give them logic app contributor permissions or that role. But if you just want them to be able to run the playbooks and kick off maybe some of those response actions, it's actually a Sentinel role. I'm just quickly do that here, which is the Sentinel responder role. Okay, so that's going to allow you to run the playbooks. If it is, again, developing the playbooks, it is actually a logic app contributor, I think, but let's be sure. Yeah, logic app contributor role that you need to assign to your users. And again, it's roles-based access, so you can get very granular. You don't need to use these out-of-box roles if you only want them to run certain workbook or certain playbooks or access certain features within Sentinel. You can tightly control that as well. It is quite granular. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, guys, that is everything that we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us over these last 3 months and 3 webinars. We do intend to have additional webinars coming out over time. We'll go a little bit more into detail around things like how to write log analytics rules, how to write playbooks. We may even do a webinar on how to simulate attacks with some of the MITRE tools that are available to you. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions specifically related to Sentinel or Defender, its capabilities, or would like to find out what services we offer, because here at CDW, we do have a full set of professional services to help deploy Sentinel or Defender. We also offer managed services in both those platforms. Please feel free to reach out to us. And if you have any questions that you just want answered, reach out and we'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. I appreciate it a bunch. Have yourselves a great day.